Hey, this is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. We are back in the business of podcasting for season 3, episode 1 in a brand new studio. So let's get it going.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
We're rolling. Let's do this thing. We are in a new studio. It's going to more room for guests. We're going to have more room for making the place look more than just my shelf over here of my knickknacks and things. I got Sackboy right over here next to me, right off frame. You can't see him. Always with me is Walking Jesus. But this is going to afford us the opportunity. One of the things that's happened over the last month that we have been doing other things is that I've had people ask to be a guest on the show. And so we wanted a studio, the producers of the show wanted a studio that was more agreeable for them, that was larger for their needs. And I said, that's great for me because I need something larger as well because I'm going to have more guests. And we have lined up some interesting topics coming up. One of them, we're going to talk about just war theory and hopefully have a very, very good guest for that particular show. I have to nail that guy down. I have somebody that wants to talk about just civilizations, a clash of civilizations, going back to Thomas Sowell's book on that, and wants to come in and be a guest on that. So that's going to be great as well. We've had some great lineup of some great guests, and then we have other people that want to come back and rejoin us to recover things we've already covered and to update different information. So I'm very excited about the possibilities that exist for season 3. Also very excited because the Christmas episode got a lot of lovely feedback, and I don't know that I was expecting that. So, not that I don't get good feedback. I do get good feedback, but that there was something about that. And that was very impromptu. That was me calling up JD and Lisa and saying, hey, look, I've got time. I'm in town. I just want to do a Christmas episode. Let's throw this thing together. And it has gotten a lot of really good feedback. Even after Christmas, I had people calling me that were listening to it in January, telling me that how much they appreciated that episode. So that was really nice to hear, and it's really nice to know that something that we did echoed with people that way. So to get started this year, there's a few things I want to cover. We will, as always, I'm a fairly Taylor Swift free zone. I have grown to appreciate. I will say this: for the first time ever, I felt like I was defending Taylor Swift recently, as people were starting to get just very, very animated about their feelings about her being on NFL shows and things of that nature. During the games, they're showing Taylor Swift. She's there with Travis. I don't care about any of that stuff at all. But there was just people that were becoming more aggressive. I remember what it was. I was trying to remember what it was. It was Taylor Swift standing up during Tracy Chapman singing Fast Car at the Grammys. And there were all of these people that were animated about it as if she were trying to steal the light away from Tracy Chapman. What a big deal it was to have Tracy Chapman back. I have to tell you, as somebody who loved Fast Car when I was a kid, I am stunned at how big a deal that song has become over the last year. That took me by surprise. And to hear so many people talk about it with a reverence that they talk about it, I don't remember that when I was younger. I remember we all loved the song. I remember it was different. It came at a time where music was, going in the 80s and 90s, music was what's a good word for it, JD? Very poppy, it was very pop, or it was very guitar centered. So it was electric guitar when you had those hard rock bands and the power ballads and all that were reigning at that time, or you had this extreme pop kind of 80s cocaine fueled fun that everything was in. And so Fast Car by Tracy Chapman was part of a wave of a different, more folksy sounding music that came out at that time. And it was an extremely popular song. I don't remember it having the emotional impact that it seems to be having today. And so that took me a little bit by surprise even for me, when I was watching, I was so thrilled to see her on stage and singing. But then people were so angry at Taylor Swift for standing up during that, which, by the way, she wasn't the only one standing up. So now I find myself in the position of talking about Taylor Swift for a second. And here's what I want to say on this. One particular issue that I will defend Taylor Swift on, and I will talk about it for a second. If you're a kind of person that likes to stand up when a song that you really love is on, then you understand people standing up. I honestly don't understand everybody sitting down. And I get it. Maybe there's a sense of protocol there. There's a sense that at the Grammys, if you were standing up all the time, or it started to become a measure of how much you like one person versus another, everybody stood up for them, but not everybody stood up for that one. I go to concerts, man. I never sit down. I don't understand people who sit down at concerts. I never have. When people are playing music that I like, I'm standing and enjoying the music. So I get this standing. If I'm at church and a great song is being played, I'm going to stand up faster than anybody else in the room because I'm ready to just stand and however you want to describe that moment, how to enjoy it, to allow the music to just move through you, to be a witness to it when you're standing up, all of that. That's my way of saying that if I were in a room and Tracy Chapman walked out on stage and started singing Fast Car, I'd probably be standing too. I would not understand everybody that thought they were so cool that they just sat there and grooved and nodded their heads. Stand up. Show some respect. It's a great song and a great artist who hasn't been on the stage for a while. This is a moment, right? So what if you didn't stand up for everybody else? Stand up for this one. This one deserves to be stood for and danced through and sung along. Everything that you should do when great music is being played in front of you, that was the time to do it at that moment. And so in this particular issue, I defended Taylor Swift. I find myself in the odd position of both talking about Taylor Swift and defending Taylor Swift because the criticism against her for standing to me is so stupid. Because if you're a stander, you get it. I stand up when music is playing. And I watched that room and I thought, what are you people sitting down for? You're not cooler than Tracy Chapman. Stand up and show her respect. She deserves you all standing at this moment in honor of her being back on stage. So I liked that. That's it. That's all I'm going to say about that. And then I'm going to go back to being a Taylor Swift free zone. I have nothing to say about all the other aspects of Taylor Swift. Okay. I want to talk for a second. I know I have mentioned, I was talking to JD before we started. I know I've mentioned live action Cinderella multiple times on this show. And so it's like, how much have I talked about live action Cinderella? It was a question I had to ask. And I'm asking it because there was a couple things that I saw recently. And one of them was when my daughter asked if one night we were sitting around, she said, you can watch anything you want. And she said, can we watch Cinderella? Yeah, I love that movie. So let's put it on. And we watched it again. And then I was watching Ted Lasso with my wife. We rewatched the whole series. We've watched it once before. We're rewatching it now again, and we're almost done with the whole series again. And there was a scene in Ted Lasso. And one of the things that I love about Christianity is it's amazingly counterculture. And what I mean by that is that there's a power in Christianity. And when you see it practiced in the tiny little increments, this was something that amazed me about Gandhi when I was younger. When I was younger and trying to understand, wrap my mind around people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., even Malcolm X, and reading their biographies, their autobiographies, and trying to understand people, William Wilberforce, trying to understand people who had massive impact on society, who basically changed the world. When they came in, when they were born, the world was one way. By the time they left it, it was an entirely different way. In whatever role they played in it. And you can overstate any individual's role in a massive movement so that you have people saying William Wilberforce changed. It wasn't just William Wilberforce that did the abolitionist movement in England. There was Thomas Clarkson. I mean, there were so many people involved in that. Charles James Fox. I mean, so many people that had different motivations, different backgrounds, different beliefs than William Wilberforce. But his impact was huge and disproportionate at the time compared to other people often in many ways. Thomas Clarkson, I would say, was a big deal as well, but we don't remember him as much as we remember William Wilberforce. When you look at people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X, who animated entire groups of people to become motivated and to follow them, people like Gandhi, and then existed on beyond their day, when they cease to live in our time, they extend out beyond that, and we remember them and talk about them. As I was looking at Gandhi and I was trying to understand how he did what he did when I was younger, and this will come back to Cinderella and Ted Lasso, I promise. One of the things that amazed me was that Gandhi openly rejected the lordship of Christ, the religion of Christianity, the idea of needing Christ to be forgiven for his sins. When you read his autobiography, I hear a lot of people talk about Gandhi and they'll say, well, Gandhi rejected Jesus because the Christians around him were not sufficient. They didn't seem full with joy. That was one of the things that I've often heard. It's not true. In his autobiography, some of his favorite people in the world that he knew were Christians. One of the things that he adamantly rejected about Jesus, although he liked Jesus' teaching, he just hated the idea that he needed to repent to Jesus. He didn't feel like he needed to apologize to Jesus for the things that he'd done in his life. So that element of oftentimes that people try to give Gandhi a pass on his need for repentance, I think is his own writings work against that. He understood who Jesus was, understood what the whole deal was between that, and just rejected the idea out of hand. But here's why we're talking about him now. The most memorable thing about Gandhi is something he took from Jesus. The idea of him saying, if someone strikes you on one side, you offer him the other. His nonviolent resistance. He would have rejected the idea altogether. He hated the language of people that would say passive resistance. He didn't see anything passive about what he was doing. It was nonviolent non-cooperation. It was direct, aggressive non-cooperation. We are just not going to do what you want us to do. And then when you respond violently to our act of non-cooperation, it will expose you for what you are so that the world can see you for what you are. And all of this taken from this idea of, if a man strikes you on your right, offer him up your left. This one teaching of Jesus applied in such an uncompromising manner transfixed the world on this man. I will not strike back. And if you hit me, I will offer you the opportunity to hit me again on the other side. And I will not let you make me into something that I don't want to be. My nonviolence is going to expose you for your violence so that the world can see it. Now that interested me because what we're saying here is that Gandhi was able to take one single teaching of Jesus and apply it without compromise to the world in which he lived and become a figure that drew the attention of the world and had a disproportionate impact on changing the state of India and their relationship with England. So powerful, by the way, was his application of Jesus' teaching that it informed Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Christian, of the power of that application of that teaching in situations of injustice. And so the civil rights movement applied that through Martin Luther King Jr. and his efforts. Nonviolent, non-cooperation, offer up your left to the man who struck your right. And then transformed the American South and the United States with that teaching as well. So you see there the incredible power of a single teaching of Jesus. That amazes me, by the way. An uncompromising application of a single teaching of Jesus. And in the case of Gandhi, by somebody who absolutely rejected the lordship of Jesus. And we see the power that has. Now, let me get back now to Cinderella and Ted Lasso. I wanted to talk about both of those because we are told in the scripture of the need to forgive. Repeatedly, we're told about this idea of forgiveness. And not to hate our enemies and not to allow ourselves to be transformed by their hatred of us. In Romans chapter 12, we get a great, that's one of my favorite chapters. I think it's probably almost everybody's favorite, one of the favorite chapters when you talk about the application of being a Christian in life. And it talks about in Romans chapter 12 that we're the pouring out of ourselves our life as an offering. We give up ourselves as our offering. Our life is our offering to God, our sacrifice that we give to God. And in that, the list of things that come up as we're talking about that, there's this refrain of to heap burning coals of love on the heads of those people who hate you, of your enemy, that we will distinguish ourselves by our love in this world. And we will not allow the hatred that the world has towards Christ and towards those who are his followers to transform us into the likeness of the world. We will remain in the likeness of Christ, and that will be our witness. And so you see then, okay, how can I apply these particular teachings to my life? And that's one of the things that I think is I'm going to give away some elements. So if you haven't seen Cinderella yet, or if you haven't seen Ted Lasso and you don't want me to ruin this for you, skip ahead through this and go to the next one. But at the end of the live action Cinderella, when she is, in the Cinderella sense, triumphant, when all the barriers between her and the prince have been lifted and they finally see each other for who they are, and he has embraced her for who she is. And that is a lovely moment there where she says, will you take me as I am? And he asks her back if she'll take him as he is. And so as she's leaving, you see her stepmother, the wicked stepmother, and she's standing, played by Cate Blanchett, standing on the stairs, staring down at her in that haughty way that she has. And Cinderella looks at her and tells her, I forgive you. And then just walks away. And it's such a powerful moment. And then there's a different kind of forgiveness than in Ted Lasso, where he finally finds out that this person he thought was his friend has been actively undermining him and working against him, and brought Ted Lasso to this place so that he could fail, and by failing hurt somebody else. That this person was using Ted Lasso and what she considered at the time the ridiculousness of putting him in the position as an American football coach coaching an English football team, and that his failure would hurt someone she wanted to hurt. And she finally confesses this to him, and he immediately says, well, I forgive you. And those are two different examples of the power of forgiveness in those narratives that are shared. Because when Ted forgives Rebecca, you see her released from what she's done. Right? I mean, she brought to him, and this moment is such a great example of repentance and forgiveness. You can watch it on Apple Plus. That at this moment where Ted, in the first season, where he finds out and she brings it to him, and she is broken and she's afraid of how he's going to respond, but she has to come clean finally from what she's done to him, and she lays it all out there, and he hears and he says, I forgive you because I understand what you're going through, because people do crazy things when they're in pain. I forgive you. And that forgiveness releases her from the past. The simple act of not carrying grievance against her, because that's the way of the world that we live in right now. I was recently reading The Godfather. I've never read the book The Godfather before. And I was reading the book The Godfather, and in there, it's interesting to me, I feel like how much Mario Puzo is condemning certain aspects of this thing that became sort of like he was the ultimate mobster. He created the ultimate mobster, the greatest romanticizing of the mafia ever, I think, is through The Godfather, the movie, right? It romanticizes it all in such a way as to elevate these people into heroes, and they're really cool, which is why you see later on through the works of Martin Scorsese, as he tries to dial that. Goodfellas was a big deal when it came out. I remember hearing the actor Roy Scheider, who was so excited about Goodfellas when it came out, because he said Goodfellas has finally cast these people as the monsters that they are, because there was this romanticizing of this concept of mafia and power, and all of that came through Don Corleone and Michael Corleone and the Godfather saga, this idea of these avenging angels that set everything right, but they do it so in such a calculated way, they ultimately rise up against people. And there's vengeance at the heart of it. I also remember reading an article when I was younger talking about Braveheart, which is a movie that I loved when it came out. I saw it multiple times. I haven't watched it in a while. I think the last time I watched it with my son. And it was like, we're going to watch guy movies, and Braveheart's a guy movie, so let's watch Braveheart. And we were watching it, and I remember, though, the words of an article that I read when I was younger that said Braveheart is essentially revenge porn. And there's a lot of that in our culture today. Movies that the bankability of the movies is on, we're going to set everything right. And when I'm going back to Mario Puzo, he seems to condemn, to some degree, all of this idea of vengeance playing out between human beings, because he talks about the cost that it's had on Sicily in the book, The Godfather. That whole areas of Sicily that have lived by this honor and vengeance code and setting things right have lost entire generations of men who have been lost to fighting about constantly in this cycle of set things right. Avenge me. I was reading about this very same thing, by the way, in Harold Bloom's book on Shakespeare. What is the name of that book? Let's see. It was Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. In his chapter on Hamlet, he talks about the conflict that's going on in Hamlet between Hamlet's father, Hamlet is actually his name, the ghost of his father coming and telling Hamlet, you must avenge me. And his father being the representative of the vengeance culture, the honor culture. You are bound to vengeance. You are bound to this action. You must take it because of what was done to me. Honor requires you to kill, and because I was killed. And that Hamlet, Harold Bloom says, and others, he quotes other scholars in the book, who argue that the tension in Hamlet comes from the idea that Hamlet's not that kind of guy. That his father represents the vengeance culture, but Hamlet in some way or another represents enlightenment, or this new man coming into existence, this rational being. And then he struggles throughout the whole story to be able to take that vengeance because he isn't from his father's generation, and he isn't driven by this honor code. He's driven by his rational capacities, and he's trying to reason his way through this as he's trying to do what he feels like he must do to honor his father. And Bloom calls that's the tension of the story, that Hamlet Sr. came from one generation driven by vengeance and honor, and Hamlet Jr. comes from a different generation driven by rational capacities and thinking and studying and schooling, and that his requirement to live up to the standards of his father basically destroys everything. And so it's the end of Hamlet. My daughter and I were talking about Hamlet recently because she's reading it for school, and I was reading it along with her because I love to reread these things. And the power of the story is that basically you see these efforts to avenge his father end up destroying everybody in the kingdom for the most part, except for a couple of people. Horatio comes through, Fortinbras the invader comes through, but everybody else ultimately gets destroyed by it, even innocent people that weren't ultimately, or weren't at the beginning, a problem with it. So you see this vengeance and honor code play itself out in destructive ways throughout Shakespeare's plays as well. You see the same thing in Romeo and Juliet. These families at war with each other, and ultimately over the course of less than a week, I think is the span that we have in the story of Romeo and Juliet, these two young bright stars in the family fall in love with each other, and disaster strikes because of the honor-bound system that they live within that calls for vengeance and recompense when one person has been wronged versus another. It starts out, the stupidity of the story of Romeo and Juliet starts out with a fight that is instigated because someone bites their thumb at another person. Literally just bites their thumb when they see them. That's the whole first dialogue of the play. He bites his thumb at somebody. Did you bite your thumb at me, sir? I bite my thumb. But did you bite it at me, sir? I will admit that I bit my thumb. And it goes back and forth because the act of biting his thumb at him is demanding that he take on some role of honor here and avenge the slight. So Shakespeare's great at showing us the destructive power of that revenge culture. And we see it throughout all of our movies, and we love them. I love them, by the way. I don't want to act like I'm some high and mighty person that doesn't like these movies. I enjoy them as well, but I also understand them through the lens of that idea that this is a horribly destructive thing, which is why let's get back to Ted Lasso, who is wronged, who looks at the person who wronged him and says, I forgive you, and releases both of them from this cycle of offense and vengeance. Offense and vengeance. There's nothing to right here. There was only a broken human being in front of you. And that's the greatest thing about that moment of forgiveness between Ted and Rebecca, because Ted says, I forgive you. I understand. You hear a lot of people say, hurt people, hurt people. It's a line that you hear a lot. Ted Lasso says it in season 3. I've heard it from other movies that hurt people, hurt people. I think Will Smith said something similar after he slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. Hurt people, hurt people. It's a great way to say it at that point. Yeah, that's why I walked up on stage and slapped another human being. But at that moment, when the apology happens, the forgiveness is offered, and every party in there is released. And Rebecca is released from having to carry the burden of this. She even says it to someone later as she explains what she did. And he said, Higgins asked, how did Ted respond? And she says, can you believe it? He forgave me. As if that was just the most outrageous thing that he could possibly do. She was wanting to wallow in the horrible things that she'd done, but he released her to go fix other relationships by saying, I forgive you. Now let's go back to Cinderella, because it's slightly different. Because the stepmother didn't ask for forgiveness. So what is the power of forgiveness in that situation for Cinderella to look at this person that was broken, who hasn't asked for forgiveness, and to say, I forgive you? Well, it has another effect. Forgiveness releases the offender from having to carry the burden of their guilt for the rest of their lives. And now they're free to be the people they ought to have been, because they're not spending every second trying to make up for what they've done in their past. But at that particular point, by forgiving the stepmother, it's the ultimate attack against the plans of the stepmother against her. This person has spent an inordinate amount of their time and energy trying to destroy this innocent human being, Cinderella, to make her feel less than, to put her into her place. And at that moment, the power dynamic has shifted. And suddenly all the power resides with Cinderella. She can do anything she wants. She looks at this person who is probably expecting the worst at that moment, is probably expecting the full weight of vengeance upon her, and is steeling herself to take it upon her with that pride that she carries with her. And she says, I forgive you. Your hatred of me, your mistreatment of me, and the effect it has had on my life ends here. I will forget this and move on for my life and be happy. You don't get to dominate me any longer. Not in reality, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. This ends now. Sorry about that, JD. And this ends at this moment. And that's another power of forgiveness, of simply following the teachings of Jesus in an uncompromising manner and to forgive the offense that's been brought against us, because it's both a way to release the offender when they're repenting and asking for forgiveness. You don't have to carry this burden. I remember I one time went to a guy who worked in ministry. He was fairly, well-known, fairly, renowned in his area. And I had said something to him years earlier that I thought upon reflection could have been received unkindly. And so I went to him and I said, I need to apologize to you for what I've done. And he said, I don't even remember what you're apologizing to me. But then he says this to me, which I thought was so brilliant. He said, but I well understand the demands on us, those of us who are carrying the burden of offense, and the need to unburden ourselves so that we don't have to carry that any longer. He said, I don't even remember what you're talking about, but I forgive you. What a beautiful thing to offer me. He understood that I needed to get that off my chest, but I understood from him that he had not been sitting around thinking about how rude that I was. He had not carried it with him, but he still got it. He said, this is bothering you, so I have to release you through forgiveness. Now, I have heard people get upset about the idea of forgiving someone who hasn't asked for repentance because the power doesn't extend then to them. They still find themselves in that place. But that forgiveness at that moment is the power that Cinderella had. The only thing that she could do to truly be crushingly defeat the evil stepmother was to just communicate to her, this is over. We're not two forces at tension with each other forever. I'm not going to carry your offense with me. I'm not going to think about you and worry about you all of the time in that sense. What I'm going to do is forgive you and move on with my life. And you move on with yours. So there's a power in forgiveness. And those are two different ways that we see that power enacted. And so when Jesus is telling us to forgive, and then through the epistles we're told later to forgive, to seek forgiveness, to offer love to those people who hate us, you understand there's something deeply counterculture about Christianity to the world that we live in. And by living uncompromisingly as much as we possibly could with just some of those teachings of Jesus, we could see our entire lives transformed. And hopefully that transformation will spread to others as well. And I think that that's the beautiful thing. We're going to talk about this more, but that's the first thing I wanted to talk about as far as the counterculture nature of Christianity. That we live in a culture that celebrates and glorifies vengeance. We recognize pride in the people around us and the need, if someone does something to me, to be able to demonstrate back to them through my own actions against them that I have power to respond and to set things right. And you don't know who you are messing with. The ultimate sign that somebody has crossed a line as far as their self-assessment is when they get in trouble with the law or they try to go into a restaurant, they've done something wrong, or anytime they get in trouble and they say, do you know who I am? That's the end, right? That's the point where you know that somebody has lost all sense of proper self-assessment. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Do you have any idea how powerful I am? Do you have any idea what I can visit back upon you? The delightfully counterculture, the beautifully counterculture movement of Jesus that he offers you at that point is to just forget the offense, forgive the offense, pocket the insult. Don't let that moment define you or walk with you beyond that. Just move on. Move on to more productive things in your life. So the first genuinely counterculture thing about Christianity I wanted to talk about at that moment was forgiveness. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. That was Jesus' counterculture. Christianity's counterculture. Christianity is better. I just finished an article that I wrote for an organization, and the article's title is Christianity is Better. That's going to be a theme, by the way, of season 3. Christianity is better, and to forgive is better than vengeance. It just simply is. It's superior for everyone involved, and it's like I said, it's beautifully counterculture at this moment to be able to be the person that doesn't become obsessed with demonstrating our own power or place or authority and ability to take back and to lash back out against offense, but to be the people that are capable of forgiving those who've offended us and to take that offense and just throw it away. Just get it out of here. We're not going to live our life dominated by the worst moments of other people's interactions with us. We are going to seek Christ in all things, and through that first, we're going to forgive the offenses that have been brought against us so that they no longer have domination over us, and hopefully even if those people have come to repentance, they no longer have to feel like they carry the burden or weight of their worst behaviors on them as well. So the next thing I want to talk about, so that's one. There's 3 things I want to cover today. That was one. The other one is a weird story in the Bible. I teach every once in a while the college class at Johnson Ferry Baptist Church. It's fun. I love it. I get the opportunity to go in maybe once a month and teach students. And they usually give me a chapter of the Bible and say, we want you to teach on this. This time the last time I spoke, they gave me Matthew chapter 8, which is just it's a powerful filled chapter and from Matthew's perspective, because it follows 5, 6, and 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount. in the Beatitudes and all that, where you get this one first time example of Jesus as the didactic teacher sitting with a crowd listening to him. And he's saying, do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. This is good, this is bad. And he gives it's just a great moment for Jesus. And you get a lot of teaching in that moment. And from this, really, you get this concept of Jesus as a great teacher. And as if to go against that immediately, chapter 8 starts with Jesus' Galilean ministry in Matthew, and it's just miracles. And he just starts this run of miracles in chapter 8. He restores health. He multiplies resources. He cleanses lepers right at the beginning. The story of the centurion and the faith of the centurion comes right after, which, by the way, well, we may need to talk. I'm going to talk about that in a later episode as well, because there's a fascinating aspect of that story that I'd like to get into as well. The kind of evolution of seeing the power of Jesus and the authority that he has through his ability to heal. But Matthew is saying, look, we have the great teacher, but we have a great healer. And let's not forget, as we have this teaching, that we also have the power of Jesus as far as his ability to act in this world and to be the ruler of this world, the Lord of this world. So we're reading in chapter 8, and all of a sudden you get to the story of the demoniacs, the demon-possessed men. Now, Matthew says there's 2. Mark and Luke only talk about 1. Apparently, I didn't know that this is a big deal, that there are a lot of people who say, this is one of the reasons I can't believe in the scripture, because there's these areas where the scripture doesn't agree with each other. It may be just, Matthew talked about 2 and that there were 2 there, but that Mark and Luke, there was one particular one that was worse than the other. I don't know. I don't think that that's not a contradiction, right? It can be both true. For things to be contradictory to the point that I should cease to trust them as a source, there has to be something about them that if this is true, then B cannot be true, that they cannot live together at the same time. If A is true, then B is false. If B is true, then A is false. And that's the relationship. That's a contradictory relationship. There's nothing contradictory about 2 people reporting and talking about one particular demoniac and then another person saying, well, there was actually 2 there, but the story kind of revolves around 1. If that's the point of the story, then there's nothing there to look at and say, well, they can't possibly live together. Well, they could live together. You just got a different detail from one guy than you got from the other 2. It really isn't that big a deal. It doesn't go that deep. And it's a weird thing for people to get caught up on. But let's get past that, because what struck me about this story, and I've known this story, this isn't like the first time I ever read Matthew 8. It isn't like the first time I ever heard the story of the demoniacs. But sometimes when you read a story or reread it, and you have as you get older or in a different perspective, you have a chance to revisit it, something about it changes for you. And one of the things that I tell people all the time, as somebody who came to the faith from outside, that I was an atheist, was that one of the things that I found fascinating about the Bible when I started reading it and I became a Christian was that I felt like the Bible gave an accurate description of human beings. I don't know what I thought the Bible said before I was a Christian. I have a hard time remembering. I do think I confused the Bible with other sources, other philosophical views, and I thought that there was this rosy view. One of the things, I had a depressing view of what other human beings were like when I was a non-Christian. And one of the things that drew me to the Bible was that when I started to read it, I thought, wow, this is consistent with the way that I see the world. I expected the Bible to be flattering of human beings, to tell a great story. And I didn't realize how the definition of what it means to be a human through the biblical literature that I was reading was exactly what I saw. Going to Romans chapter 3, everybody is bad. Everybody is bad. Every single person left to himself would be bad. Our mouths are open graves, right? Our feet are swift to shed blood. We are seeking sin and everything. And throughout the Bible, you see this continuing story, not of these holy people who are perfect and great, but most people are deeply disturbed and struggling with things and fighting in this relationship with God as best they can. Even the best of them fighting to hold on to some level of righteousness and often failing miserably. There are far fewer characters in the Bible, far fewer people in the Bible, far fewer figures in the Bible who do everything right than there are people who are messed up all over the place. And so I saw what I thought was an accurate depiction of man in there. And here, I want to talk about this story for a second, because the end of it, I think, is so fascinating. So if you're not familiar with the story of the demoniacs. In Matthew 8, it's a different story. I think I pulled up here Mark chapter 5, because I wanted to start there. He says, then they came to the other side of the sea, to the region of Gerasene. As soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs. No one was able to restrain him anymore, even with chains, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had snapped off the chains and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. And always, night and day, he was crying out among the tombs, in the mountains, and cutting himself with stones. Let's get that as a background for a second. Because you would think, like, well, I mean, if there was a crazy person in a cemetery in your part of town, that would be weird enough. Just crying out night and day. But in this, I think we might have some sense of a modern town and not some sense of how small they were. I was talking to this group about the size of these towns. And one of them, when we're talking about particularly the Galilean area where his ministry was, like, look, Galilee was not big. I go to Johnson's Ferry Baptist Church, the campus. I can't remember the exact size of it. I think we determined that based on the history books that I read, the entire area of Galilee is like half the acreage of Johnson Ferry's acreage that it owns there at the church. And the entire population of Galilee was somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000, which means that about the number of people that were showing up to church on any given weekend. So when you're talking about these towns, and we talked about this in the Christmas episode, it's easy to think in a modern sense when we think about these towns. As we talked about during the Christmas episode, when you think about tombs and we think about, you have to think about these grottos and these hills that they would go into and bury their dead in and then cover up the entrances to. And so these places of tombs, it wasn't like a modern cemetery. It would have been like a burial place in the hills where they would use these grottos or tombs, and they would place the bodies in there, and there would be multiple bodies in there, sometimes as far as a family. And he walked among the hills in these tombs, and he just screamed day and night among the tombs in the mountains and cutting himself with stones, that he was a distraction. They had tried to subdue. Even the strongest men had tried to deal with this. And there's a question of safety that is brought up. And you have three different gospel accounts of this. You have Mark 5, 1 through 20, Luke 8, 26 through 39, and Matthew chapter 8. And all three of them, when you read them all together, you get a sense that this town was being burdened by this, was plagued by this, and they had tried to stop him. They had tried to subdue him. They had tried to do something about this and couldn't, because whenever demon was possessing him, whatever he was being dominated by was so powerful, it was breaking chains and restricting or rebuffing the strongest of men that were trying to help him. And he wailed day and night and cut himself. And tombs were a big deal to these people. Visiting the dead and the burial rites and the things that they would do, that was a big deal to them. And so he was interfering with a part of their life and burdening this town, burdening this place. And then Jesus gets off his boat, and he sees him, and the man starts to yell at him, and he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" he asked him. "My name is Legion, because we are many." And he kept begging him not to send them out of the region. So the situation is interesting because there is this man or two men who have plagued this area. And the second Jesus shows up, they know it's over. And they scream out for him not to do what he's about to do. And they declare themselves to be legion, many, many in one. And now a large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. The demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so we may enter them." And he gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits came out. As a matter of fact, in one translation, it just says, "Go." That's what you get from Jesus. They're like, "Send us into those." And it says, "Go." Now, here's where things get crazy that I have overlooked until now, I think, in my assessment of this story. I don't know if you've ever been around pigs, but they're not quiet. And 2,000 of them would have been loud even if they weren't doing anything. There's just a noise that comes from animals. 2,000 is a lot of pigs. And so as Jesus says, go, and these spirits leave these men, and go into 2,000 pigs, we can imagine the violence and noise of this scene. How terrifying that would be. How it testifies to the violent nature of the spirits that we're talking about here, as he just says, go. This thing has plagued this town and these people, and they are powerless to stop it, and they're living with it day and night. And then Jesus shows up, and just moments after showing up, go. And he says go, and literally all hell breaks loose. Pigs, 2,000 of them. The unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed down a steep bank and into the sea and drowned there. So all of a sudden, 2,000 pigs in a rush and a fury run down a bank and throw themselves into the sea and kill themselves, testifying to the violence of the spirit that was cast out, the murderous violence, and the power of both Jesus and the demon that was cast out in comparison. Go. And then they hurt on their way out, to destroy on their way out, kill on their way out. The men who tended them ran off and reported in the town and countryside, and the people went to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed by the legion sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. I think that is one of the most beautiful sentences I've ever read in the Bible. Someone plagued, disturbed, disturbing others, tormented and tormenting others. Someone that they had tried to restrain. He was breaking up the ability for them to do certain rites, to take seriously their responsibility or duty to the dead. And moments after meeting Jesus, there he is, saw the man who had been demon-possessed by the legion sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. Complete and total restoration through Jesus. Again, I'm hard-pressed to think of many more lines of scripture that I've read that are more beautiful than that right there. The tormentor has been restored. The torment that he wages on them is over. The cost was 2,000 pigs. How do they react? And this is where I say the Bible fascinates me, because it feels so true. Even when I was a skeptic. They came and saw him who had been demon-possessed by legions sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. The eyewitnesses described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs, and they began to beg him, being Jesus, to leave. Jesus just solved, in moments, the greatest problem that group was dealing with. A tormentor walking in one of the tombs, wailing day and night, cutting himself, so powerful and strong that chains couldn't restrain him. Violence, and they were afraid to go into the tombs because of it. And Jesus solved it moments after coming to town. And what was their response? You got to go. You can't stay here. You got to leave. We can't live with this. What a humbling display of power that must have been for them, right? To show up and to see completely restored, completely in his right mind, dressed normally, just sitting there, What that must have been like for them to see. These men, whoever, whatever, they had been tormenting them, that had been wailing, cutting themselves, violent, out of control, unrestrainable, powerful and strong beyond reason. Fine. Just sitting there with Jesus. And the response is so human. I can't deal with this. You got to go. You got to leave, man. You can't stay here. This is too much for us. That is the display of power and authority that we get through that particular story, and the beauty of it at the end there, of just how troubling it is for us to believe in the reality of Jesus. It's daunting. I was at a meeting the other day, and there was a story shared during the meeting about how there was this person in need, and the group that wanted to be able to help them didn't have they had the resources to help, but not available in the manner that the person who had the power or authority or whatever to hurt this person wanted them. Right? I can get it to you, but they needed it faster than they wanted to be able to get it, and they needed it in a form that they didn't have to get it. And they were trying to figure out how fast they could do these things or turn it around. And they got a phone call. While they're sitting there, they get a phone call, and somebody calls in and they said, hey, out of the blue, with no idea about what was going on, they said, hey, I'm just calling to check in. I'm worried about fill in the blank, the name of the person who was in trouble at that moment. They were just on my heart at this moment. Is there anything that I can do to help? And they said, yeah. And they told them what was going on. And the person on the phone said, it's done. And they took care of it immediately. When the reality of that kind of God hits you in your everyday life, I'm most of the days I'm comfortable with a distant God. I'm comfortable with a God who started the universe, who got it rolling. Whatever you want to attribute to him, he did all of these things. On those days, most days, I'm really comfortable with that God. But we find out that's what's so true about that. There's something both awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time when things like that happen, when God just makes it clear, I'm here, I'm taking care of things, I'm watching, and I can do. These people in the story that I just shared with you, they had been trying so hard to find some way to help that person, and their hearts were broken because they were getting close to the point where they thought, we're not going to be able to get these things done in time to be able to get it to the place so that those resources can help this person out. And then all of a sudden the phone rings and somebody says, just sitting around my house, thinking about that person, wondering if there was anything that I could do to help them right now. Nobody had called them. Nobody had told them. There had been no prayer requests sent out, nothing. And they say, suddenly I was sitting around and I want to help that person. What can I do? And when they told them what was going on, they said, it's done. It's taken care of. You don't worry about it. I got this one. There's something, and I've got a ton of stories like that you hear from different people in ministry in different areas and the different places that they've worked. And there's something disturbing about that for the person who is very comfortable with a God who is transcendent, but not present and active. And a present and active God solved their problems. And their response in that story in the Bible is, I can't live with this, man. You got to go. I see that guy is healed. And it's suddenly quiet. Right? There's no screaming, there's no wailing, there's no cutting, there's no fighting, there's no threat. Quiet. You got to get out of here, man. I can't deal with that kind of thing today. Such a deeply human story with a deeply human response. I mean, you would think if you were making these sort of things up, I would think that the response of those people would be to celebrate the greatness of Jesus, to be thrilled about what he came, to have grandiose displays and festivals set up. I think that the truth of it is translated through that moment, the sort of testimonies of embarrassment. God acted in power in our community, and our response was, I can't deal with this. You're going to have to go. Such a fascinating story. All right, so that was 2. So I'm going to 3 things I want to talk about today. 1 was talking about the counterculture nature of the teachings of Jesus and the power of following Jesus' teachings uncompromisingly and what it can do to change people or to transform the world around us. The second one was revisiting the story of the demoniacs. And the third comes from where I was recently invited to Students for Life of America's National Summit. And so I had the opportunity to go and speak to the audience there in the morning. Was right after Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had the whole room singing a song. And that was not cool because everybody was so happy and she was the greatest thing ever. And then now here comes Jay Watts, and nobody knew who I was compared to Alveda King. And before me had been Mike Pence, the former vice president and congressman, and all of these people. That Will Witt was there before me. So all of these people that everybody in the audience knew. And then Alveda King gets up and just mesmerizes the audience with this moment of sing-along. And then she's done. And then everybody is just so happy and clapping. And here comes Jay Watts. And I felt a little bit duped. I was nobody told me I was going to be following Alveda King singing. But I wanted, we have a small window to talk about things that are important for your audience. And if you're a speaker, you should take very seriously this idea of what can I pass on to people. I don't worry too much about people getting mad at me or not being happy with what I say. What I worry about is whether what I'm saying has any value to the audience whatsoever. And oftentimes you want to revisit things. So this is an audience that I have a little bit of time, and I've been praying for weeks about what was I going to say at this moment? How am I going to take advantage? How am I going to honor the people that have brought me here? How am I going to honor the audience? How am I going to honor God with this moment and say things that will be of value to these people? And it was the night before in the hotel as I was praying that suddenly a new way of talking to them came to me, at least a new way to start. I said, there's 3 things I want to start, 3 ground rules before we talk about some details or some strategies about how we argue. I want to set some ground rules for the audience. And so I wanted to share those 3 ground rules with us, and that will be the last thing that we cover today. Because after it was over, they gave me a little area to sit around and talk, and what I'd prayerfully hoped would have impact, I was affirmed all during the day as hundreds of people came to talk to me as I sat in this corner in this little table that they set up for me, and people just filed by all day to listen and ask questions and talk. They affirmed that these ground rules had helped them. And so I want to share those today for the end of episode 1 of season 3. So here's the first one. The only way to fail, as we're talking about abortion, so I was there to talk about Students for Life of America. I thought that was assumed. Everybody understood. I was there to help people be able to handle talking about abortion better. I was given a 20-minute window to be able to help the audience feel more empowered to have conversations and to engage the culture around them on the issue of abortion. And so that's a tight window. That's a really tight window. So what you have to say has to be, I want to take this, has to be clear so that people can take something away from it. I could do a show, and it would have been a great show, JD. I can put on a show, man. I can get up there and just be all show, but I don't want to do a show. What I want to do is leave the audience with something. And so here was my ground rules before I got into some details about arguing. This took up probably the first half of it, at least. The first ground rule is the only way to fail is to say nothing. What I mean by that is people are so afraid of engaging issues and messing up. I'm going to say something wrong. You are going to say something wrong. I told them, if you're afraid that you're going to make people mad, you don't have to be afraid that you're going to make people mad. You're going to make people mad. They're going to get mad at you. If you're afraid, I'm so worried that they're going to hate me, you don't have to worry. They're going to hate you. All of these things are going to happen if you take a message to the world that abortion is wrong. But the only way for you to fail is for you to say nothing. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to get flustered. You're going to lose points you would not consider prior to the conversation. You're going to be in the middle of a discussion and somebody's going to bring up something you know nothing about, and you're going to feel like a fool at that moment. But you got to keep talking, because the only way for you to get better is to keep talking. It's the only avenue to an improvement and getting better at this. I liken this to when I've taught people. I spent years as the coach whose responsibility was to coach lacrosse teams where the people who are starting to play lacrosse for the first time make up the majority of my team. So I struggled often with this because how do you take somebody that knows nothing about this sport and help them to be able to play a sport that has a very high skill level and against people oftentimes who have a much higher skill level than them? And so I would tell everybody, the first day of working in lacrosse with them, you will never be worse at lacrosse than you are today. This is the worst you will ever be at lacrosse. I expect you to be bad today. I don't want you to worry that you're making mistakes today. Today, I expect mistakes, all kinds of mistakes. I expect you to be the worst you will ever be at lacrosse today. And by the way, that's true even when I'm working with advanced people. I've had the opportunity over the last few years to start working with some very elite lacrosse players who end up going on and being great players. And when I'm working with them, it's the same thing. It's the same marker. It should be all better from here. Whatever you are doing today, when we first start working on it, you're going to be the worst you've ever been at that skill set that we're working on. Whatever combination of things I've put together for you to work on, the first few reps will be the worst reps you ever do on this, hopefully. And we're just going to get better by doing it over and over and over again until we master it. That's the same thing that's true here. If you're afraid to talk about this issue, because you're afraid it's going to make people mad, you can't be afraid it's going to make people mad. You just have to know it's going to make people mad. If you're afraid to talk about this issue because you're afraid people are going to hate you, you don't have to worry about that. People are going to hate you. Just go ahead and say what you got to say. And if you're afraid you're not good at it, but you haven't done it before, here's the bad news. You're right. You're not good at this. But the only way for you to get better at it is to just keep doing it. Keep trying. Keep having conversations. Keep learning. Keep thinking about this issue. Keep reading. Keep talking. Keep reaching out to people. Do it and do it and do it until you get better. There is only one way to fail when talking about an issue as morally important as abortion. And that's for you to say nothing. And to live your life in such a way as the people around you have no idea how you feel about this, what you think about this, how you consider this issue. Have reasonable, respectful conversations, but have conversations. Start conversations. What do you think the unborn are? Why do you think we're allowed to kill them? Those are two simple questions that you can ask people to get a conversation going on this. You don't even have to worry about being right at that point because you can just listen to them talk and then respond to the things they're saying. What are your views on this? Why, if you are permissive about abortion, do you think the unborn are the kind of thing that we're allowed to kill? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. But just get busy talking because you will get better the more that you do it. And the only way to fail is to say nothing. My second point, and I articulated it this way, was calm down. You are right. And what I mean by that is, if you're a pro-life, if you're on the pro-life side of this, let's even take that label off of this. If you're arguing for what I call, or for what Christopher Kaiser calls, or for what Nancy Pearcey calls, or for what any number of philosophers that have worked on this, if they call it an inclusive view of human value, meaning you think that all human beings are valuable by virtue of what we are, not the things that we can do, not the capacities that we have, not the potentials that we have. What we are is what makes us valuable. And if you think that a human existence begins at conception or fertilization, the moment that we have a human organism present, we now have a human being present, and what makes them valuable is our identification as a member of the human family. And every member of the human family has to be treated with dignity and respect. If that's what you believe, then I think you're right. And so there's no reason for us to be so heated and crazy because the truth testifies for itself. I remember years ago, we were sitting around talking, a bunch of us, and different people had debate more or less, and we go to campuses and we take Q&As or we talk to people, or you do formal debate and you have somebody standing up and you debate against them. And there was a good run going, a good run of debates, a good run of Q&As, a good run. And the question came up, why are you guys so good at this? Like it was a trick. So that answer to that is easy. We're good at it because we're right. The truth testifies to itself of its nature. If you're saying true things, it seems to go in accordance with the world around you and fits rather nicely. It's when you're saying things that are wrong. If you've ever been, I've been wrong. If you've ever been in the middle of a conversation where you're arguing a point that's wrong, it just keeps getting more and more out of hand. People just keep raising objections. And all of them are good because you're wrong. And you just keep saying things that you hear yourself saying that you know are stupid, that you shouldn't be saying. But you've dug in your heels on being wrong today. And everything that everybody has to say, even like a 4-year-old could come up and bring up an objection against you because it's so clear that what you're saying is wrong. I remember my wife sharing with me a story. She said, we were sitting down and it was me on one side and this really deeply new age person on the other side. And then there was this person there that was talking to both of us, asking us about what we believed. And she said, as the longer the conversation went on, this person who disagreed with both of them at the outset, but just wanted to understand these different views, she said he kept saying to these two women who were, one the New Age and one my wife, who was talking about Christianity, as they were discussing, because he wasn't saying, tell me about Christianity. What he was saying was, tell me how you understand this. Tell me how you understand that. He was asking about particular aspects of the human experience and saying, what does your belief system say about this? How does it inform us about what this means or how we are to think about this? And every time they would offer conflicting or contrasting answers, my wife said that guy would say, no, that doesn't sound right to the New Age person. That sounds weird. That sounds wrong. That doesn't sound right. What she's saying sounds right, though. That makes sense to me. I understand what she's saying there. That comports with how I see and experience the world. That fits the world as I see it, as a data point that's missing. If you plug it in, it goes with everything else. That makes sense. What you're saying there sounds like nonsense. It doesn't make sense to me at all. That's the way the truth being spoken works. So when I say calm down, you're right, the first part of that is it's easy to argue if you're right. The other reason I ask people to calm down is because I warn them, even though you have the truth on your side so you can relax, the truth can take a while to land. So I'm a living experience of this. People have said things to me that I knew were right, or I knew I was wrong, or I was struggling in the moment and I was getting emotional. And then sometimes weeks, hours, months, whatever, after we've had that conversation, it took a while for the truth to land on me and for me to be able to be willing to admit I was wrong and they were right. The quickest example I can give to this, I was speaking, I think this is in Boston, at this Catholic high school in Boston. And I spoke to the crowd, to an assembly. And after it was over, a young man came up to me. He was a Muslim. And I had said something in there that he didn't care for. And when he brought it up to me and started to talk to me about it afterwards, he just said, I think what you said was wrong, was poorly stated. And I would ask you to consider that. And I was reflexively offended, I think, or defensive would be the best way, right? My reflex was to be defensive of what I'd said. And I tried to defend it to him. I feel like what I said was justified. And he was lovely, irked, felt like I wasn't giving him, and this was maybe 17, 18-year-old young man, wasn't giving him serious respect. I don't know what, but he found the conversation irritating. But here's the thing. After the assembly, I had a grace period to eat an apple, drink a Coke, I don't know, do something. And then I was going to be they were bringing blocks of the school to me. And so I had 3 or 4 blocks afterwards where we did Q&A. So ultimately, everyone that was in that room with me for the assembly had the opportunity to be in a smaller venue where they could ask me questions. And by the time I got to the first block, I'd become convicted that the young man was right. I had thought about what he'd said. He talked to me at that moment and I wouldn't admit it while I was there. But as I sat there for about 30 or 40 minutes by myself, eating and mulling things over, the truth landed on me and I thought he was right. His criticism of me was well-founded. I shouldn't say what I said. I shouldn't use that phrasing any longer. And so every single person, because that interaction had happened in front of everybody, by the way. And so every single person that came through, when we did the blocks, I said, I want to address something. I did this toward the end. A young man came up to the mic and asked some questions, and I responded this way. And I have decided that he's right and I was wrong, and I'm never going to say things the way that I said it before. I think his criticism is well taken. And he was at the last block, so he's sitting in the back of the room. And I said, I'm so glad that you're finally in the room with me, because I've told every other block this about what you came to the mic to talk to me about. And I could see him getting defensive as I was saying that. And then when I said, I have come to believe you were right, I was wrong. It took a while for it to settle on me, but once I did, I realized I'm never going to say things the way that I said it before. Thank you for having the courage to offer me the correction that you offered me, and in the spirit in which you offered me. And you could have blown him over with a feather with his response. I mean, he was clearly ready for me to argue more with him, was not ready for me in humility to admit that I was wrong about it. But that's just it. The humility took a while to come, because initially I just wanted to defend the ground that I had staked out. And that happens in conversation. So be calm, because you're right, and understand that when the truth is on your side, even when you're right, it can just take a while for that to land. And you can have conversations with somebody about abortion, and you think you have just had no impact on them whatsoever because they were so angry and so upset. And you have no idea how the truth and God and all that is working on them. That's all happening away from you, and it can take minutes, it can take hours, it can take days, it can take months, weeks, it can even take years. But it's not your job to turn them around at that moment. It's your job to represent the truth as best as you're capable of doing so. And getting emotional and angry and getting frantic to make them change their mind, that doesn't help. That actually hinders the process. So the truth can take a while to land. It can take a lot longer to land if you've been a jerk to them. So the first thing I said was the only way you can fail is to say nothing. The second thing that I said was to calm down, because you're right. And the truth is going to aggravate them all on its own. You be faithful in delivering the truth. I am not talking about prioritizing peace over truth. It's just going to require them to come to a level of discomfort with the beliefs they have if we're going to change their mind. But if the truth is on my side, I don't have to bully it through, because the truth has a power all on its own. So I will deliver my message. I've said for years, one of the things I've tried to teach people is we don't want to win arguments. We want to win people with good arguments. We're not looking to amass a track record of victories. We're looking to amass a society of people who see all human beings as worthy of dignity and respect, and who are willing to adjust their behavior to accommodate other human beings, even in areas where that behavior is something that they previously truly loved. They need to see the unborn as something more, which leads me to my last point of the ground rules. The argument that we have is that abortion is wrong. Not that I don't like abortion, not that abortion is distasteful or ugly. Both of those things are true, by the way. I don't like it. It's distasteful. It's ugly. But my argument is abortion is wrong. I've been there where I was at a table during a Q&A one time, or as a panel, and this brilliant woman next to me who was a lawyer, she listed off everything in her time that was wrong. I mean, she talked about everything. Just everything she could think of that was wrong about abortion, everything that she'd ever heard, all the pain that it can cause women who are dealing with the guilt of past abortion, the pain that it can cause men who are dealing with past abortions, the negative impact that it has on people physically, the different risks that can come, that you increase the percentage of the chance of you having as a result of abortion. All of these things she was throwing in. And then because she talked for so long, they were saying, well, Jay, I'm sorry, you had X amount of time. You have this amount of time. That's fine. She told you everything that's wrong about abortion, and, those are important things. What I want to talk about for just a few moments is why abortion is wrong. Abortion is wrong because it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being. If it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being, if that statement that I just gave you is true, then we would expect there to be all these additional evils that come along with it. because injustice brings multiple levels of evil with it, not just the initial injustice, but the sort of wake that it leaves in society as that injustice moves through. We would expect there to be terrible things that accompany the terrible thing of abortion. But the terrible thing of abortion is that it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being. And if it were able to move through society with no wake of terrible things behind it, it's a terrible thing in and of itself that must be fought. If there was no evidence whatsoever that women struggled psychologically, which there is, if there was no evidence that people had health problems that came as a result of abortion, which there is, if none of that were true, and it were good for society, killing the unborn is still the unjust destruction of innocent human life, and it is still wrong, and abortion must still be opposed. Abortion is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being. We don't want to get caught up in preference claims where I like abortion, you don't like. When somebody says you don't like abortion, don't have one. You don't like abortion, have nothing to do with it, but leave it alone for the rest of us. Never said I don't like abortion. Said abortion is wrong, and that's the argument that I'm making. You know, I think abortion's personally wrong, but I think that we should leave it alone and let other people do whatever they want. That's not the kind of argument we're making here. You wouldn't make that argument about rape. You wouldn't make that argument about child abuse. You wouldn't make that argument about theft or murder. What we're talking about here is the unjust destruction of innocent human life. It's not the kind of thing we can just let people do and live and let live. It's a different category. It's objective moral claim. Abortion is wrong. That's what we're arguing. I'm not arguing preferences. I'm arguing objective moral claims. I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm not saying I find it distasteful. I'm not emoting. I'm not saying abortion, ew, gross. What I'm doing is making a case that abortion is wrong. So those were the three ground rules that we started with. Number one, the only way that you can fail is to say nothing. Number two, calm down, you're right. It's not necessary for us to get angry. It's not necessary for us to get emotional. The truth is on our side, and the truth will land sooner if we let the offense of the truth itself do the work and minimize how offensive we are personally. The truth, when it comes to abortion, is deeply offensive. And that truth can be communicated through all sorts of ways. I wholeheartedly agree with people who show abortion victim photography. It's not my favorite thing to do in the world, but I do it because I've seen the impact that it can have when you're in front of a group of people that just will not intellectually engage the issue, who laugh and scoff and make fun of you, who insult you and pretend like you're stupid for bringing it up, and then you show them a video or images of the practice of abortion. It changes the nature of the conversation. Its truth is communicated in a way that was being a different way. It's just a different way, right? I can verbally communicate the truth, rhetorically communicate the truth. I can write the truth. And then sometimes I can just bluntly show it. And it is showing the truth. I had an objection to that at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill one time because I wasn't allowed at this particular place to show the imagery. And so I verbally shared how abortion worked and something particularly what it like in the room afterwards where they have the contents that they reassemble the child to make sure they've gotten everything outside of the woman so we have no septic infections. And as I described this young man came up to me later and he said, that description was unnecessary. You only shared it so that it would make people feel bad about abortion. He said, because you morally think abortion would be wrong, even if that didn't happen, even if it weren't gross or it weren't violent or it weren't those things. Well, you're absolutely right about that. As long as it's the unjust taking of innocent human life, I agree with you. I said, but did anything I say up there, was anything I said untrue? Did I say anything as I described the practice of abortion that was untrue? Was it false? And he said, no, it's true. I said, exactly. I have no responsibility to hide a truth that you find uncomfortable simply to make it easier for you to continue to believe the things that you believe about abortion. I don't like it any more than you do. In fact, I probably hate having to describe it more than you do because I believe it's the unjust killing of innocent human lives. The people that I know that show those images, they don't love to show the images. They show them because they hate them to their very core. And they believe that people having to see abortion will be a path to ending it. That the hidden nature of it makes it easier for you to be able to support it. At the end of the day, it communicates something true about abortion. I don't care if you're comfortable with that truth or not. You should be uncomfortable with that truth, and showing it to you should make you feel bad. That's the entire point of seeing them, of talking about this, of writing about this, is so that people are confronted with what's going on in their world. But if you watch, particularly Seth Dreher, who I've had on this show, if you go back and listen to him when we talk about this, if you watch Seth Dreher in front of this, Seth is not offensive. He's not angry. He's not yelling at any people. He's not condemning them. He shows the images and he stands in front of them and he graciously and respectfully answers questions from people who hate him for being there. He doesn't add to the offense of the photographs. As a matter of fact, he does everything he can to undercut that offense with the love and grace and mercy of Christ. But he doesn't back down from the truth of what those images are communicating. And sometimes that's a way to get to people. Sometimes it's a way to break through so that they're willing to have a conversation about that. But it doesn't require us to be emotional and angry and animated. As a matter of fact, Seth Dreher works for Created Equal, and they have very strong ground rules about how you're allowed to interact with people. And they are governed by the grace and mercy of Christ. If you've heard Mark Harrington talk about that, they are required, if they're going to stand in front of those images, to display the grace and mercy of Christ to the people that they're talking to, in addition to those images. But those images commit something true, and so we have to calm down because we're right. And what I mean by that is that it's not necessary for us to match the emotion and hatred that the other side offers oftentimes when we get in these discussions. It's best to be reasonable and let the truth do its work, because the truth on this subject is offensive enough. And then finally, abortion is wrong. That's the ground rules that we have to fight on. Our argument is that abortion is wrong, objectively wrong, morally wrong. The practice of abortion is the intentional destruction of an innocent human life. And I don't argue that by pointing at Scripture. I don't argue it by appealing to Jesus. We make a case that says the unborn are human from the moment they come into existence. That's science. The best explanation for our experience of equal human dignity, that all human beings throughout all cultures and all religious beliefs in all places ought to be treated as best as they can be, and there are violations against human nature. There are things that we can do to other human beings that are just evil because they violate the basic right that a human being has to continue to exist. So that's the evil, the wrongness of abortion. The basic explanation of our sense of equal human dignity is that all human beings ought to be valuable or treated with dignity by virtue of what they are, our shared humanity. There simply is nothing else about us that each one of us shares equally. So if all of us have some equal claims to be treated at least minimally well, in the sense that I think we all have an equal claims not to be killed for no reason, not to be dominated or hurt, not to be abused or raped or any of those things, if we all have those claims, that right, and we all experience it equally, then it has to be grounded in something that we equally share. And the only thing that we all share equally is our humanity. And if you're human and I'm human and JD is human, which is true, the unborn are human as well. They qualify for membership in the human family. And so we have some very basic minimal responsibilities and duties to them, not the least of which is just to refrain from killing them. Abortion is wrong. That's our argument. Not that we don't like it, not that it's ugly, not that it's unpleasant. It's wrong. And the only way to fail in addressing this issue is to say nothing. All right. Well, that is Season 3, Episode 1 of Human Things. In a nutshell. Actually, that's not in a nutshell. That's in its incompletion. We can do it in a nutshell in some other format. So, again, I would like to thank everybody who has reached out to me to tell me that they're enjoying the show. I would like to thank the people who are making the show possible, who are funding it. If you go to our website, merelyhumanministries.org, and go to the donate place, you can find a place where you can send checks. You can donate online. If you want to contribute to this effort, it would be much appreciated. We want to ramp up these efforts. We want to be able to do more and more with more guests and more cameras. We have a bigger table, a bigger room, bigger groups around that are going to be able to come in and to participate and to contribute to this effort. And all of it is for one end, to have a place or a space where we just make the case over and over and over again to the world that human beings matter by virtue of what we are, that an inclusive view of human value is best for us all, and that we ought to treat each other, all of us, our whole neighborhood, with dignity and respect. Thank you again for joining us, and welcome to Season 3.